The warning lights flashed red across the dimly lit outpost station, casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. Vix lay crumpled in the corner of the medical bay, her silvery scales dulled with pain and exhaustion. The last of her crew had departed hours ago, leaving her behind as their laws demanded. She could still hear Captain Reed's final words echoing in her mind. "The weak cannot burden the strong. This is our way." Her breathing came in shallow gasps, each intake of air sending sharp pains through her damaged chest cavity. The mining accident had crushed her left side, leaving her internal organs bruised and her bones fractured. By Brightcrest standards, she was now considered a liability, one that would consume precious resources without contributing to the collective. The outpost systems continue their automated routines, humming and clicking in the background. It was a small facility, originally designed to process mineral samples from the asteroid belt surrounding the dead star HD 2971. Now it would become her tomb, a cold metal coffin floating in the endless void of space. Vix tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and gave way. The medical scanner on the wall displayed her vital signs in bright blue numbers, all of them gradually declining. Without proper medical attention, she had perhaps 3 days left. It was longer than most abandoned ones got, she thought bitterly. The logical part of her mind, the part that had been trained since birth to accept the harsh realities of space, understood the decision. Resources were precious. Medical supplies were limited. The strong survived, the weak perished, and the species continued. It was a system that had kept the Brightcrest alive through centuries of space travel and colonization. But there was something else now, something that made her chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. The humans called it loneliness. Before their species had made contact with the Brightcrest 5 years ago, such concepts had been foreign. Emotions were seen as evolutionary holdovers, useless relics that needed to be suppressed. Yet in her pain-filled haze, Vix found herself thinking about the human delegation she had once observed. They had seemed so strange with their constant displays of what they called feelings. They smiled, they laughed, they showed concern for each other. At the time, she had dismissed it as primitive behavior. Now, as she lay dying alone in the sterile medical bay, those memories returned with surprising clarity. She remembered one particular human who had rushed to help another who had tripped during the delegation. Such a waste of energy, she had thought then. Why help the clumsy? But the human had smiled, helped their companion up, and asked if they were okay. There had been something in that moment she hadn't understood until now. The outpost's computer chimed, announcing the automatic sealing of all airlocks as per abandonment protocols. Vix would have enough air and basic sustenance to last weeks, but without medical treatment, they would go unused. Her eyes drifted to the viewport above her head, where distant stars twinkled indifferently. According to the laws of her people, she should accept this end with dignity. She should lie here quietly, allowing her resources to be conserved for those more worthy. But for the first time in her life, Vix felt something rebel inside her. She didn't want to die alone. She didn't want to be just another logical sacrifice to the collective good. As her consciousness began to fade, her thoughts turned again to the humans and their strange ways. They would never leave one of their own like this. They fought against death with an illogical ferocity that her people found amusing. In her delirium, she almost wished. The medical bay's lights flickered, and Vix's eyes grew heavy. The pain was becoming distant now, replaced by a creeping numbness. As darkness began to claim her, the last thing she saw was a shooting star streaking past her viewport, a final light in her darkening world. She didn't know then that it wasn't a shooting star at all, but rather a small cargo ship about to change everything. The cargo ship Star Runner shuddered violently as Tom cut the engines, letting momentum carry him toward the abandoned outpost. Warning lights flashed across his control panel. The primary fuel line had ruptured, and his oxygen reserves were dropping faster than he'd like. He hadn't planned on stopping here, but emergencies in space rarely cared about plans. "Just my luck," he muttered, guiding his ship toward the outpost's docking port. The facility's external lights were still active, a good sign that at least some systems were still running. His scanner showed it was a Bright Crest installation, abandoned but still maintaining basic life support. The docking procedure was rough, his damaged ship barely managing to align with the airlock. Metal scraped against metal as the magnetic clamps engaged, and Tom winced at the sound. He'd need at least a day to repair the fuel line, maybe longer if the damage was worse than he thought. Pulling on his environment suit, he cycled through the airlock and entered the outpost. The air was breathable, but protocol was protocol. His boots echoed against the metal floor as he moved through the dimly lit corridors, his suit's lights illuminating the way. "Hello," he called out, more from habit than expectation. "Anyone home?" The outpost's layout was standard, central hub with spokes leading to different sections. Tom headed toward the engineering bay first, hoping to find spare parts for his repairs. As he passed the medical bay, however, his suit's bioscanner beeped urgently. "What the?" He stopped, checking the reading. Life signs, weak but present. The medical bay doors slid open with a hiss. His lights swept across the room, finally settling on a crumpled form in the corner. A Bright Crest female lay there, her silvery scales dulled and her breathing shallow. "Oh God!" Tom rushed forward, kneeling beside her. His medical training was basic, but even he could see she was in bad shape. Multiple fractures, internal injuries, severe dehydration. How long had she been here alone? The Bright Crest's eyes flickered open, focusing on him with difficulty. She made a weak sound, something between a hiss and a whimper. Tom had dealt with Bright Crest before. They were logical to a fault, and their society had strict rules about the weak. He could guess what had happened. "They left you here to die, didn't they?" He spoke softly, already reaching for the medical supplies on the nearby shelf. "Well, that's not happening on my watch." She tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. Tom activated his suit's translator, but her words were too faint to register. Her vital signs were dropping. He needed to act fast. Working quickly, he administered emergency stabilizers from the outpost's supplies. The Bright Crest tried to push his hands away, probably following some cultural protocol about accepting help, but she was too weak to resist. "Sorry," Tom said, continuing his work, "but I'm human, and we have this annoying habit of saving lives whether you want us to or not." Over the next hour, he cleaned her wounds, set up a proper hydration line, and used the medical bay's regenerator to start healing the worst injuries. The whole time, she watched him with a mixture of confusion and what might have been fear. Finally, when her vital signs showed improvement, Tom sat back and removed his helmet. "There, that should keep you stable for now. I'm Tom, by the way. I'd shake your hand, but I don't want to jostle those ribs we just patched up." The Bright Crest stared at him, then slowly raised a trembling hand to her translator patch. Her voice came out rough, but clear. "Why? Why help? I am. Burden. Waste of resources." Tom smiled, shaking his head. "See, that's where humans and Bright Crest differ. We don't see helping others as a waste. Besides," he glanced at his ship through the viewport, "I'm stuck here for repairs anyway. Might as well make myself useful." Her eyes followed his gaze, then returned to his face. For a moment, something flickered in those alien eyes, perhaps the first spark of hope she'd felt since being abandoned. "I'm going to help you," Tom said firmly, "and I'd really like to know your name." The outpost's systems hummed steadily as Tom worked on his damaged ship, splitting his time between repairs and checking on his unexpected patient. It had been 3 days since he'd found Vix, and though she was slowly recovering, every moment they spent here increased the risk of discovery. "Your people," Tom said, watching Vix attempt to sit up on her own. "They'll be monitoring this outpost, won't they?" Vix managed to prop herself against the wall, her movements still careful but stronger than before. "Yes. Regular patrols. They will notice your ship soon." Tom ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of engine grease. He knew he was violating at least 6 different space protocols by helping her. The Brightcrest had made their laws clear to all species. No interference with their abandonment practices. They considered it a violation of their cultural sovereignty. "We could leave," he suggested, checking her vital signs on the medical scanner. "My ship's almost fixed. I could take you to a human medical station." Vix's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of distress Tom had learned to recognize. "That would make things worse. My people would see it as kidnapping. They might declare war." She wasn't exaggerating. The Brightcrest were notoriously protective of their customs, and humans were still new to interstellar politics. One wrong move could spark a diplomatic crisis. Tom pulled up a chair, his expression serious. "So what happens if they find us here?" "I will be executed," Vix said matter-of-factly. "For accepting help, for becoming a burden. You will be imprisoned, or worse." The casual way she discussed her own death sent chills down Tom's spine. He'd heard about the Brightcrest's ruthless efficiency, but experiencing it firsthand was different. They weren't evil. They just had a completely different view of life and death. "There has to be another way," Tom muttered, more to himself than to Vix. He stood up and began pacing, his boots echoing in the medical bay. "What if we could prove you're not a burden? Show them that helping the injured can benefit the whole species." Vix watched him with curious eyes. In the past few days, she'd begun showing more emotion, though she tried to hide it. "How? Our laws have existed for centuries. They are based on survival necessity." Tom stopped pacing, a determined look crossing his face. "Your laws are based on resource management, right? Saving the many by sacrificing the few." When Vix nodded, he continued, "But what if that math is wrong? What if you're actually wasting resources by throwing away experienced crew members who could be healed?" He moved to the medical base computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Look at this. Your injuries were severe but treatable. The resources used to train a new crew member would far exceed what it took to heal you. Plus, you have years of experience that would be lost forever." Vix leaned forward, her translator working to keep up with Tom's excited words. "But that is not how we think. The strong survive." "But what defines strength?" Tom interrupted. "Is it the ability to abandon your companions? Or is it the will to survive, to adapt, to become stronger after being broken?" He gestured to her healing body. "You're living proof that your people's definition of strength might need updating." The lights flickered briefly as the outpost systems ran their daily diagnostic. In that moment of dimness, Vix's scales glowed faintly, a physiological response Tom hadn't seen before. "You speak dangerously," she said quietly. "Such thoughts, they go against everything we believe." Tom sat back down beside her. "Sometimes the most dangerous thoughts are the ones we need most. Your people are amazing. You've achieved incredible things. But maybe, just maybe, there's room for growth." Vix was silent for a long moment, her alien features unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "If you are wrong, we both die." "And if I'm right," Tom replied with a small smile, "we might change your entire society for the better." The outpost's proximity alarm chose that moment to sound, its harsh buzz filling the air. Tom's smile faded as he checked the scanner. "Well," he said grimly, "looks like we'll find out soon. We have company." The next 2 weeks aboard the outpost moved slowly, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. Tom had managed to hide his ship in the asteroid field just before the patrol passed, making the outpost appear abandoned as expected. Now, in the relative safety of their isolation, he focused on helping Vix recover. "Try again," Tom encouraged, standing a few feet away from Vix as she gripped the support bars. Her legs trembled with effort as she took another step forward. "That's it. You're doing great." Vix's scales rippled with exertion, but she kept moving. 5 steps, then 6. Each day brought more strength back to her injured body. The regenerator had healed most of her internal injuries, but her muscles needed time to rebuild. "This is inefficient," she gasped, reaching the end of the bars. "So much time, just to walk again." Tom handed her a hydration pack, something he'd modify to work with Brightcrest physiology. Healing isn't about efficiency. It's about getting better, no matter how long it takes. As Vix rested, Tom noticed something different about her. The way she held herself, the subtle changes in her scale patterns. She was beginning to show emotions more openly. Whether she realized it or not, their time together was changing her. "Tell me about Earth," she said suddenly, surprising Tom. It was the first time she'd asked about his homeworld. "Your species, you care for each other, even the weak ones. How do you survive?" Tom pulled up 2 chairs, helping Vix into one before sitting himself. "We survive because we care, not in spite of it. When we help each other, we become stronger as a whole." He reached for his tablet, pulling up images of Earth. "See here. These are hospitals, places dedicated to healing the sick and injured. And these are schools, where we teach our children. Even those born weak or different get a chance to contribute." Vix studied the images intently. "But surely, some still die. Some cannot be saved." "Yes," Tom admitted. "We can't save everyone. But we try. And in trying, we've learned so much about medicine, about science, about ourselves." He swiped to a new image, a human child in a wheelchair, smiling. "This child can't walk, but her mind is brilliant. In my species past, she might have been abandoned. Instead, she grew up to design new types of spacecraft." Vix reached out, her clawed hand hovering over the image. We would have left her to die. And lost all she could offer," Tom said gently. "Strength comes in many forms, Vix. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we need help." They spent the rest of the day continuing her physical therapy. Tom noticed Vix pushing herself harder, as if the conversation had awakened something in her. When she finally collapsed into bed that night, exhausted but satisfied, she spoke again. "Tom," she said, her voice uncertain, "I feel different. Things I never noticed before. When you smile, when you show concern, I understand it now. These emotions, they're changing me." Tom checked her vital signs, a habit he'd developed. "Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But when I think of returning to my people, of becoming cold and logical again." She trailed off, her scales darkening with what Tom now recognized as sadness. "You don't have to be what they expect," he said. "You can be both, logical and compassionate. Maybe that's what your people need to see." Vix was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Finally, she tried something new. She smiled. It was an awkward expression on her alien features, but genuine. "Tomorrow," she said firmly, "I want to try walking without the bars." Tom grinned back. "Now that's what I call strength." As he dimmed the lights for their sleep cycle, Tom realized that Vix wasn't the only one changing. Teaching her about humanity was reminding him of all the things that made his species special. Sometimes it took an outsider's perspective to appreciate what you took for granted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had this moment of understanding. A human and a Brightcrest, breaking down barriers one step at a time. The outpost warning system blared to life, its harsh alarm cutting through the quiet of their morning routine. Tom rushed to the control panel, his heart sinking as he read the display. 3 Brightcrest ships were approaching, their signatures unmistakable. "They're coming," Vix said, standing steadily on her own feet. After weeks of recovery, she'd regained most of her strength. Her scales now shimmered with their natural silver gleam, no longer dulled by injury and weakness. Tom quickly assessed their options. "We could try to run. My ship." "No," Vix interrupted, her voice firm. "I will not hide anymore. These past weeks, they taught me something worth fighting for." The docking bay alerts chimed as the first Brightcrest ship made contact. Tom moved to stand beside Vix, both of them facing the main doors. They could hear the airlock cycling, footsteps approaching. The doors slid open, revealing 4 Brightcrest officers in their ceremonial armor. Their leader, Commander Black, stepped forward, his scales darkening with shock at the sight of Vix alive and standing. "This is impossible," he stated, his translator making his voice sound metallic. "You were marked for abandonment. The weak do not survive." Vix stepped forward, her posture straight and proud. "I am not weak, Commander. I was injured, and now I am healed. Thanks to this human, I am stronger than before." The commander's guards raised their weapons, aiming at both Vix and Tom. "You have violated our most sacred laws," Black declared. "Accepting help from an outsider. Consuming resources meant for the worthy. You know the punishment." Tom moved to protest, but Vix held up her hand, stopping him. "Commander, before you execute me, I challenge you to a physical evaluation. Test my strength, my skills, my worth to our people. If I fail, I will accept my death without resistance." The commander's scales shifted in surprise. It was a formal challenge, one he couldn't refuse without violating their own laws. He studied Vix for a long moment before nodding sharply. "Very well. Begin with the standard physical assessment." What followed was unlike anything Tom had ever seen. Vix moved through a series of increasingly difficult physical tests, demonstrating not just recovery but improvement. Her movements were more efficient than before, her reactions quicker. When she finished, even the guards looked impressed. "Impossible," Commander Black muttered. "Your injuries were fatal. The records show." "The records were wrong," Vix interrupted. "We have been wrong. Look at me, Commander. I am not a burden. I am living proof that our laws need to change." She gestured to Tom. "This human taught me that true strength isn't about abandoning the injured. It's about helping them become stronger. Think of the resources we waste, discarding experienced crew members who could be healed. Think of the knowledge we lose." The commander's scales flickered with conflicting emotions, something Tom had never seen in a Brightcrest before. "You speak of changing laws that have kept our species alive for centuries. I speak of helping our species grow," Vix countered. "We pride ourselves on logic, Commander. What is logical about throwing away valuable lives? About rejecting medical advances that could make us stronger?" Tom watched the exchange with held breath. He could see the other Brightcrest officers shifting uncomfortably, their weapons lowering slightly. Vix's words were having an effect. Commander Black moved closer to Vix, studying her carefully. "You are different. Your patterns show emotion, yet your logic is sound. This should not be possible." "Many things we thought impossible are possible," Vix said softly. "We just need the courage to try." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Finally, the commander spoke. "You will return with us. The council must see this development. The human will." "The human comes too," Vix said firmly. "If you truly want to understand what I've learned, you need to understand him." Commander Black's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. "You dare to give me orders?" "No," Vix replied. "I dare to show you a better way." The commander looked between them, then made a gesture Tom didn't understand. The guards lowered their weapons completely. "Very well," Black said. "You have earned that right. But be warned, the council may not be as open to change as I am." Vix turned to Tom, her eyes showing an emotion he'd never seen in a Brightcrest before. "Hope. Then we'll show them too," she said. The Brightcrest Council chamber was a marvel of engineering, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 3 suns. Tom stood beside Vix, facing the 7 council members who sat in elevated positions before them. Commander Black had presented their case, and now the chamber buzzed with angry whispers. "This is unprecedented," declared Head Counselor Gray, his scales dark with disapproval. "Not only did you accept help from an outsider, but you now propose to change our most fundamental laws." Vix stood tall, her posture perfect. "I stand before you fully healed, and stronger than before. My mind is clear, my body capable. How does this harm our people? It is not about harm, another counselor hissed. It is about purity of purpose. The strong survive. But what is strength? Tom interrupted, earning shocked gasps from the gathered Brightcrest observers. Outsiders never spoke in council. Head Counselor Gray's scales rippled with anger. You dare to speak? Yes, I dare, Tom said firmly. Because you need to hear this. Your definition of strength is flawed. You're throwing away your best people because of temporary weakness. Vix stepped forward. Council members, let me demonstrate. She moved to a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls. These are the statistics of crew members abandoned in the past 5 years. Look at their experience levels, their specialized skills. The display showed columns of data, years of service, specialized training hours. The numbers were staggering. Each of these abandoned crew members represented thousands of hours of training, Vix continued. Resources already spent. By helping them recover, we wouldn't waste resources. We'd preserve our investment. A younger council member, White, leaned forward. She makes a logical point. The cost of training new crew members exceeds the resources needed for recovery in most cases. Logic. Head Counselor Gray stood, his voice thundering. Was it logic that made you accept help from this human? Or was it weakness? Fear of death? It was evolution, Vix replied calmly. Our species prides itself on adaptation, on finding the most efficient path to survival. But we've become stagnant, clinging to laws that no longer serve their original purpose. Tom watched as her words caused ripples of reaction through the chamber. Some scales darkened in anger, others lightened with interest. The council was dividing. We cannot change the foundations of our society based on one aberration, Gray declared. Then test it, Tom suggested. Run a trial. Let some injured crew members receive treatment instead of abandonment. Compare the results. Isn't that the logical approach? Counselor White's scales brightened. A controlled experiment. We could measure resource usage, recovery rates, long-term productivity. This is absurd, Gray interrupted. We cannot. Actually, Commander Black stepped forward. We can. Article 47 of our laws allows for experimental modification of protocols if supported by 3 council members. The chamber erupted in discussion. Tom watched as Vix moved closer to the council, her voice carrying over the chaos. Honorable Council, I stand before you as proof that change is possible. I am not weak. I am not a burden. I am the future of our people, one where we can be both strong and compassionate, logical and adaptable. Several council members' scales shifted to lighter shades, a sign of agreement. White stood, followed by 2 others. I move to initiate the trial, White announced. 3 months, 50 subjects. We will measure all variables. Head Counselor Gray's scales darkened to almost black. You would risk everything we've built. We risk more by not changing, Vix interrupted. Every abandoned crew member is a loss of knowledge, of experience, of potential. True strength lies in growth, in learning from others. She gestured to Tom. Even from species we once considered primitive. The vote was called. 4 council members sided with White, 3 with Gray. The trial would proceed. As the chamber slowly emptied, Tom turned to Vix. You did it. She looked at him, her scales showing a new pattern he'd never seen before. No, she said softly. We did it. This is just the beginning. And looking at the mix of determination and hope in her alien features, Tom knew she was right. The real challenge, changing centuries of ingrained beliefs, was just beginning. 1 year had passed since the historic council trial began. Tom stood at the observation deck of the newly established Brightcrest Human Medical Research Center, watching ships arrive from both species. The facility, built in neutral space, represented something nobody had thought possible, a partnership born from a single act of compassion. Thinking deep thoughts? Vix asked, joining him at the window. Her scales shimmered with the confidence of a leader, so different from the dying creature he'd found in that abandoned outpost. "Just remembering where this all started," Tom replied, smiling. "Hard to believe how much has changed." The trial results had exceeded all expectations. Out of 50 injured Brightcrest crew members who received treatment, 47 had returned to full duty. The remaining 3, though unable to return to their original posts, had become valuable instructors, passing on years of experience to younger crew members. "The latest numbers came in," Vix said, pulling up a holographic display. "Crew retention is up 40%. Resource efficiency has improved by 35%. Even the traditionalists can't argue with these results." They watched as a group of young Brightcrest medical students entered the facility below, their scales bright with excitement. Following them was something that would have been unthinkable a year ago: human doctors, ready to teach and learn alongside their alien counterparts. Head Counselor Gray retired last month, Vix mentioned, her scales showing a subtle pattern of satisfaction. "Counselor White has taken his place. The old laws are being rewritten." Tom nodded. "And the abandonment protocol, officially listed as archaic and resource inefficient, as of last week," Vix replied. "Now we focus on rehabilitation instead of replacement. It's better." A small transport ship docked at the facility. Another rescue mission returning. They had started finding abandoned Brightcrest crew members from other outposts, offering them a second chance. Not all survived, but each one saved was a victory. "You know," Tom said, watching the medical teams rush to help, "when I made that emergency landing, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Vix's scales rippled with what Tom now recognized as amusement. "You humans never do. You just help, without calculating the cost, without measuring the efficiency. It's still strange to us." "But you're learning," Tom pointed out. "I've seen Brightcrest crew members showing concern for each other now, actually asking if their teammates are okay." "Yes," Vix admitted. "Some call it contamination by human emotions. I call it evolution. We're becoming more." The facility's intercom chimed, calling Vix to the medical bay. As the head of the new rehabilitation program, her schedule was always full. But before she left, she turned to Tom. "I never properly thank you," she said softly. "Not just for saving my life, but for showing us a different way to be strong." Tom shook his head. "You did the hard part. Standing up to your people, challenging their beliefs. I just couldn't leave someone to die alone." "And that's exactly what we needed to learn," Vix replied. Her scales shifted to a pattern Tom had never seen before, one that might have been affection. "Sometimes the most logical choice is to follow your heart." As she left for her duties, Tom remained at the window, watching the constant flow of ships and people below. The center had become more than just a medical facility. It was a symbol of change, of two species learning from each other. In the distance, he could see the star system where he'd found Vix. The outpost was still there, now converted into a memorial and training center. New Brightcrest crew members visited it to learn about the day their society began to change. Tom smiled, thinking about how a single decision, to help rather than walk away, had sparked such transformation. The Brightcrest were still logical, still efficient, but they had learned to balance those traits with compassion. A new transport was approaching. Another human cargo ship, similar to his old one. Perhaps its pilot would help spark the next great change. After all, that's what humans did best. They cared, they helped, and sometimes, in doing so, they changed entire civilizations. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, others were learning that sometimes the strongest choice was simply to be kind.